When guards found Jeffrey Epstein dead in his cell on the morning of August 10, 2019, it seemed as though the most monstrous secrets of the billionaire financier would die with him. But thousands of pages of court documents, victims' testimonies, private jet flight logs, and photographs from the island where unimaginable crimes took place were only beginning to reveal the scale of an abuse network that had operated for decades under the cover of wealth and connections to the world's elite. Jeffrey Edward Epstein built his empire on two foundations, one official, one shadowy. The first was visible to all, a successful financier who worked only with clients worth over $1 billion, owner of one of the largest private residences in Manhattan, a private island in the Caribbean, a man whose parties were attended by presidents, princes, and Hollywood stars. The second foundation remained hidden until March 2005, when Palm Beach police received a report that a 14-year-old girl had been subjected to abuse at Epstein's mansion. What investigators uncovered shocked even seasoned detectives. Epstein had created a systematic network of human trafficking and sexual exploitation of underage girls, which functioned like a well-oiled business. He had specially equipped rooms in his mansions in Florida and New York, where young victims were brought under false pretenses. The FBI identified 30 victims in 2008, but the true number is estimated at more than 100 girls and young women. The story of how Epstein escaped justice the first time became a scandal in its own right. In 2007, federal prosecutors prepared a serious indictment against Epstein. But his lawyers, including the prominent attorney Alan Dershowitz, conducted a series of negotiations with Miami federal prosecutor Alexander Acosta. The result was a deal that many would later call one of the most scandalous in American legal history. On June 30, 2008, Epstein pleaded guilty to only 2 state-level charges: solicitation of prostitution and solicitation of a minor for prostitution. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, but with an extraordinary concession. He was allowed to work in his office during the day and return to jail only at night. No federal charges were filed. Epstein's victims were not informed of the deal before it was concluded, which was later ruled a violation of the Federal Crime Victims' Rights Act. Many felt betrayed by the justice system that was supposed to protect them. Epstein served only 13 months and was released in July 2009. He was registered as a sex offender, but this did not prevent him from continuing to live a lavish life, traveling on his private jet, nicknamed the Lolita Express, and maintaining connections with influential people worldwide. For 10 years, Epstein lived relatively quietly until a journalistic investigation brought his case back into the spotlight. In November 2018, the Miami Herald published a series of investigative articles titled "Perversion of Justice," which detailed the history of Epstein's plea deal and the testimonies of his victims. Reporter Julie Brown found and interviewed more than 60 victims. Their stories were so compelling and shocking that the public demanded a new investigation. On July 6, 2019, when Epstein's private jet landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, federal agents were waiting for him. Epstein was arrested on charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. This time, federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York were uncompromising. No deals. The indictment alleged that Epstein, over the course of many years from 2002 to 2005 and beyond, had created and maintained a network for the sexual exploitation of dozens of underage girls at his residences in New York and Florida. According to the indictment, Epstein paid teenage girls hundreds of dollars in cash for each visit, during which he subjected them to abuse. He also paid some victims to find and bring him other girls, creating a pyramid scheme that gave him constant access to new victims. During a search of his Manhattan mansion, investigators discovered hundreds, if not thousands, of photographs of underage girls and young women, some of which were archived and tagged by location. Epstein was placed in pre-trial detention at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, a notoriously harsh facility. He was denied bail, despite his lawyers offering a $100 million bond. The judge ruled that Epstein posed a danger to society and represented a serious flight risk. He was placed in the prison's special housing unit for inmates requiring protection. On July 23, 2019, at 1:27 a.m., Epstein was found in his cell in a semi-conscious state with injuries to his neck. His cellmate was Nicholas Tartaglione, a former police officer charged with 4 murders related to drug trafficking. An official prison investigation ruled out Tartaglione's involvement, but the circumstances of the incident remained unclear. After that, Epstein was placed on enhanced suicide watch, but by the end of July, he was removed from it. It later emerged that this decision was made following a psychological evaluation, though the details were not made public. In the early morning of August 10, 2019, around 6:30, guards found Epstein unconscious in his cell. He was hanging from the edge of his bunk using a strip of fabric from a prison bedsheet. Prison staff began CPR, and he was transported to New York Downtown Hospital, where death was pronounced at 6:39 a.m. The official conclusion of New York's chief medical examiner, Barbara Sampson, was suicide by hanging. However, the circumstances of the death immediately gave rise to questions and conspiracy theories. How could one of the most closely watched inmates in the country, placed under special observation following the previous incident, take his own life in a federal prison? It emerged that on the night of Epstein's death, both guards who were supposed to check on him every 30 minutes had in fact fallen asleep and falsified their inspection logs. Security cameras outside his cell had allegedly malfunctioned. Epstein's lawyers hired renowned forensic pathologist Michael Baden to conduct an independent examination. Baden publicly stated that the nature of the injuries was more consistent with homicidal strangulation than suicide, though the official conclusion remained unchanged. The Justice Department's Inspector General conducted a large-scale investigation into the circumstances of the death. The report identified numerous failures in the prison's operations. Guards had been working extreme overtime due to staff shortages, some having been awake for more than 24 hours. 2 guards were charged with falsifying records and conspiracy, but the charges were later dropped in exchange for community service. The prison warden was transferred to another position. Many continued to believe that Epstein was murdered to protect powerful individuals whose names might have surfaced at trial. Epstein's death meant he would never face justice, but the investigation into his criminal network continued. Investigators focused their attention on Ghislaine Maxwell, a British socialite and daughter of the late media mogul Robert Maxwell. Maxwell was not merely Epstein's companion. She was the architect of the system that allowed him to commit crimes for decades. On July 2, 2020, the FBI arrested Maxwell at her secluded estate in New Hampshire, where she had been hiding since Epstein's death. She was charged with conspiracy to entice minors to travel for the purpose of engaging in illegal sexual acts, enticement of a minor for the same purpose, conspiracy to transport minors for criminal sexual activity, and transportation of a minor for criminal sexual activity. Charges of perjury were later added. Maxwell's trial began on November 29, 2021 in federal court in New York. What the jury heard was a story of systematic abuse, manipulation, and betrayal. 4 women, known in court documents under the pseudonyms Jane, Kate, Carolyn, and Annie Farmer, testified about how Maxwell gained their trust and then exploited them. Witness Jane testified that she met Epstein and Maxwell at a children's camp in Michigan when she was just 14 years old. Her father had recently died of leukemia, and the family was in financial difficulty. Maxwell presented herself as a powerful woman with useful connections and offered to help. She invited Jane to Epstein's mansion in Palm Beach, where she created an atmosphere of trust and luxury. Gradually, the visits came to include abusive conduct, in which both Epstein and Maxwell were involved. Jane testified that Maxwell's presence during these encounters was used to make what was happening seem normal to a vulnerable teenager. Kate, who was 17 at the time, told a similar story. Maxwell had met her in Paris, presenting herself as a successful businesswoman with connections in the modeling industry. Maxwell invited Kate to tea, gave her clothes, and created the illusion of mentorship. Then one day, Maxwell called her and asked for a small favor: to give Epstein a massage. Kate admitted she had no professional experience, but Maxwell said it did not matter. Maxwell led her upstairs, gave her massage oil, and closed the door. Epstein was waiting, and Kate testified that he subjected her to abuse. Afterward, Maxwell called Kate again, expressing how difficult it was to meet Epstein's demands and encouraging her to return. Kate also recounted that Maxwell often discussed sensitive topics with her, asking whether she knew other young girls she could introduce to Epstein. "You know what he likes: pretty, young, and beautiful, just like you," Maxwell would tell her. On one occasion, Maxwell left a school uniform on the bed for Kate and told her to wear it for Epstein. Carolyn's testimony was particularly harrowing. She was just 14 years old when she first visited Epstein's Palm Beach mansion in 2001 or 2002. She had been brought there by another girl, Virginia Roberts, who was herself a victim of Epstein. Carolyn testified that on her first visit she was taken upstairs to a room where Ghislaine Maxwell was present. Maxwell proceeded to assess her in a deeply inappropriate manner and made disturbing comments about her appearance. Epstein was also present. Carolyn testified that she returned to the mansion more than 100 times over the following years, receiving between $200 and $300 in cash each time. "I was exploited by Epstein when I was a 14-year-old girl," she testified in court. Carolyn also recruited other girls and was paid for doing so. She admitted she felt degraded and used, but kept returning because she desperately needed the money and was afraid to refuse. By the age of 16, Carolyn had developed a substance dependency that, she said, helped her cope with what was happening to her. The fourth witness was Annie Farmer, the only victim who testified under her real name. At 16, she visited Epstein's ranch in New Mexico, where Maxwell subjected her to an inappropriate massage. Later, Epstein also behaved inappropriately with her in a similar context. Prosecutors presented evidence that Maxwell was not a passive bystander, but an active participant in the criminal scheme. She recruited victims, organized their transportation to Epstein, normalized the abuse through her involvement in it, and created a pyramid-like structure in which victims themselves brought in new girls. Maxwell had also lied during sworn testimony in 2016, denying any knowledge of Epstein's activities. On December 29, 2021, after 5 full days of deliberation, the jury found Maxwell guilty on 5 of 6 counts. On June 28, 2022, Judge Allison Nathan sentenced her to 20 years in federal prison. Maxwell is currently serving her sentence at a federal correctional institution for women in Tallahassee, Florida. But the Epstein story did not end with him and Maxwell alone. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of documents hinting at a broader network of influential people connected to the financier. The private jet flight logs, known as the flight logs, contained the names of numerous passengers who had flown with him over the years. Among them were names that shocked the world. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton had flown on Epstein's plane multiple times, by some accounts up to 26 times. Clinton's representatives stated that he had never been to Epstein's island and was unaware of his crimes. British Prince Andrew, Duke of York, was a close friend of Epstein and was photographed with him on multiple occasions. Virginia Giuffre publicly claimed that she had been coerced into sexual encounters with Prince Andrew in London, New York, and on Epstein's island when she was 17. The prince categorically denied these allegations in a BBC interview, stating he did not even remember meeting Giuffre. However, a photograph existed showing the prince with his arm around a young Giuffre, with Ghislaine Maxwell standing nearby. In February 2022, Prince Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with Giuffre for a sum reportedly exceeding $12 million. Following the scandal, the prince was effectively stripped of his royal duties. Prominent attorney Alan Dershowitz, who had defended Epstein in 2008, was also mentioned in court documents. Virginia Giuffre claimed she had been coerced into contact with Dershowitz, which he categorically denied. Dershowitz filed countersuits for defamation. French modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, who ran a modeling agency, was arrested in France in December 2020 on charges connected to Epstein. In February 2022, Brunel was found dead in his cell in a Paris prison, officially ruled a suicide. On January 3, 2024, a federal judge ordered the unsealing of hundreds of pages of documents related to Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell. The documents began to be published on January 8, 2024. These materials, known as the Epstein Files, included sworn depositions, court transcripts, emails, and the names of people who were connected to Epstein in one way or another. Publication occurred in batches, each revealing new details. The documents mentioned the names of Hollywood actors, businessmen, billionaires, scholars from prestigious universities, and politicians from various countries. It is important to understand that the presence of a person's name in the documents or flight logs did not automatically imply participation in Epstein's crimes. Many of those mentioned may have simply had business contacts with Epstein or flown on his jet without any knowledge of his criminal activities. However, the very fact that such influential individuals had maintained relationships with a registered sex offender provoked widespread public outrage. The documents contained testimony from victims stating that Epstein had installed hidden cameras in his residences and recorded influential people in compromising situations. Some victims testified that they had been coerced into encounters with Epstein's associates, and that Epstein used these recordings as tools of blackmail and control. Although the recordings were never found by investigators, their possible existence became a central element of the theory that Epstein was working for foreign intelligence services or using compromising material to influence politics. On December 21, 2025, another batch of Epstein case documents was published, including photographs never previously released. On December 3, 2025, Democrats on the House Oversight Committee released images and videos from Epstein's Island taken by the FBI during a 2020 search. The photographs showed the luxurious interiors of Little St. James Island, where the crimes took place. Little St. James Island, approximately 72 acres in size, became the symbol of Epstein's empire of horror. Epstein acquired this island in the U.S. Virgin Islands in 1998 for $7.5 million. Luxurious villas, a pool, a solar power plant, and an unusual structure with a blue and white striped dome, nicknamed the Temple by locals, were built there. Epstein used helicopters and speedboats to transport guests and victims. Between the main island of St. Thomas and his private island, numerous victims testified that they had been taken to the island where they were exploited in the presence of other powerful men. Some recounted having seen well-known figures from the worlds of politics and business on the island. Local residents had been calling Little St. James the Island of Sin, long before Epstein's crimes became public knowledge. Workers who built facilities on the island spoke of Epstein's strange demands, including the soundproofing of certain rooms and the installation of an unusual security system. In a 2020 lawsuit, U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General Denise George alleged that Epstein had created on the island a perfect environment of isolation for his human trafficking network. The FBI photographs that were made public showed specialized rooms in various locations, luxurious bedrooms, artwork, and Epstein's personal belongings. Investigators also discovered documents, electronic devices, hard drives, and other evidence of criminal activity on the island. Some photographs showed rooms with specialized equipment whose purpose remained unclear. The island was sold for $60 million in 2023 to an investor who plans to convert it into a resort, erasing the physical traces of the crimes that occurred there. Alongside the criminal cases, civil lawsuits developed against various organizations alleged to have facilitated Epstein's crimes. On June 12, 2023, J.P. Morgan Chase reached a settlement to pay $290 million to Epstein's victims. The lawsuit alleged that the bank knew or should have known about Epstein's illegal activities, yet continued to service his accounts from 1998 to 2013, processing suspicious transactions worth millions of dollars. On November 9, 2023, a federal judge approved the settlement. It became one of the largest resolutions in favor of human trafficking victims in American history. The compensation program for Epstein's victims, established after his death from his estate, paid hundreds of millions of dollars to more than 125 women. But for many survivors, money could not compensate for years of trauma, destroyed lives, and lost opportunities. On September 2, 2025, surviving victims testified on Capitol Hill, sharing their stories with lawmakers and calling for reforms in the justice system. "He wanted that innocence," said one victim, speaking about Epstein's tactics of targeting the youngest and most vulnerable girls. Others spoke of years of therapy, shattered relationships, an inability to trust people, and a persistent sense of shame that had haunted them for decades. The Epstein case exposed not only the crimes of one individual, but systemic failures at every level of society that allowed those crimes to continue for decades. Victims had reported the abuse to police, social workers, school counselors, and other adults, but were systematically disbelieved or ignored because they came from poor families while Epstein was wealthy and powerful. Authorities concluded the scandalous plea deal in 2008, allowing Epstein to escape serious punishment despite overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Influential people in his circle turned a blind eye to obvious signs of criminal activity, enjoying the luxury of his parties and private flights. Banks processed his suspicious transactions without due scrutiny. Modeling agencies supplied him with young girls. The Epstein case files are not merely an archive of court documents. They are a testament to how wealth, power, and connections can create a system of impunity in which crimes are committed in plain sight yet remain invisible because no one wants to believe that such a thing is possible. It is the story of hundreds of girls and young women whose lives were destroyed by one man and a network of accomplices who helped him or looked the other way. And it is a reminder that justice, however delayed, can still arrive. When victims find the courage to speak, journalists persist in their investigations, and society finds the will to listen and believe them. But questions remain. How many more influential people were implicated in Epstein's crimes? Do compromising recordings still exist somewhere? And most importantly, how many more such networks of abuse exist right now, hidden behind a facade of respectability and wealth?